Welcome to Puro Politics, the political podcast of the San Antonio Express News. My name is Gilbert Garcia, Metro columnist, and I'm joined by
Carrie Clack, columnist, editorial board.
Nancy M. Prayer-Johnson, associate editor at the editorial board.
Greg Jefferson, Metro editor.
We're coming down to the stretch drive for the midterm elections. We're within a couple of weeks of early voting starting, and I think this week is the deadline for anybody who hasn't registered. So I hope if you haven't and you're interested in voting, please do that. But we're going to talk a little bit about the governor's race and what's going on with that. But I wanted to start by looking at everything that's happening with Uvalde. And obviously, there's been a lot of upheaval since the May 24th school shooting at Robb Elementary. Last week, the story broke that the Uvalde Consolidated Independent School District had hired a state trooper, Crimson Elizondo, who was part of the response to the shooting that day, and one of the many officers who really failed to take action during that shooting. And they hired her to work for the school district police department. Within 24 hours of the story breaking, she was fired. And then a day later, the school district suspended their police department. Nancy, I want to start with you because you've done so much reporting on Uvalde. What were your thoughts when this story broke?
You know, the last time I was in Uvalde was just, it's been a couple of weeks. I went, it was probably the second day that Brett Cross was out there in front of the administration building. And he just kept saying, I'm going to stay out here till we get our demands met, right? I mean, there was a little bit of progress, but when it came to that news, when that news broke, I thought, wow, now the district is not going to have a choice but to answer. And that's what happened, right? I mean, it was... Nothing really shocks me out of there anymore, you know? I mean, the story just keeps getting worse, if that's even possible. It's horrific, but just the details that keep coming forward are just terrible. I know that the parents were they were just really grateful to that journalist who broke that and who got that information, because they needed a break, right? And so they've been demanding the officers, there's some kind of accountability, and not just for the police chief that was terminated earlier, right? They want to make sure that the school officers are held liable. So the families will tell, often when I ask them about the school officers, they'll say stuff like, well, when we go to the school board meetings, when we go to the schools, we're literally wanded by the school police, and we know they were there on that day. And we question, did they do all they could to save our babies, right? And so that is a huge question. And they are face to face with them all the time. And so they just want to know in their hearts and their minds that they did all they could, right? And the school district hasn't done that. So when this new news came out, I mean, I can't say it was shocking, but it did get the results that we see now.
There's been so much scrutiny of what's going on there. And this was a state trooper. This is one of the state troopers who was under investigation at the time.
Yeah,
What's the thought process of the school district?
We should, we should kind of be a little specific as to what happened. So DPS has, they put 7 of the responding officers. So DPS had 91 officers on the scene that day. Yeah. They have 7 under investigation for what they did or did not do during the massacre. Crimson Elizondo was one of them. So she was under investigation. She left DPS, so she quit. Applied for one of the positions on the Uvalde school police force because they're hiring, as you know, as is reasonable, they're hiring more officers. So she applied. We know that the school district was aware that she was under investigation, but it's not clear from the email traffic we reviewed that they knew specifically what she was, what the subject of the probe was. But come on, I mean, they had to have known. I mean, there's no way they could have been unaware that she was on the scene, and that was almost certainly the reason she was under investigation. They hired her anyway, which is remarkable.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I mean,
go
the
ahead.
most damning part was that video. I mean, at first I
yeah.
actually
Talk
thought
about
I
what she
was
said in the
just
video.
trying to give, and I
Right.
do have some empathy toward the school district and the superintendent and, the staff there, the school board. Like, my God, can you imagine being in their seats? I don't put complete blame on them. But there was just no denying it. You hear her on the video saying, well, if it was my baby, if it was my kids, and, not direct quote here, but basically the effect of it was mine, I would be in there.
Yeah.
I would have gone in there.
And-
I mean, parents were just livid.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
I would guess, so the story broke on CNN Wednesday night. I have to say, we followed up very closely with our own story. Turns out Guillermo Contreras, our reporter, he's done a lot of the law enforcement stories out of Uvalde for us. He was on it, and so we had a story ready to go. We posted it as soon as we could. Within hours of that, the school district fired Officer Elizondo. I think my guess is because of that comment she made that we have on video. That's probably the reason they acted so quickly. Because you'll remember the school district had a hard time firing its police chief, Pete Arredondo,
who had a history himself.
Exactly. But it took, they had, I believe the first meeting at which they were going to terminate him, have a termination hearing, was in early August, or maybe it was late July. But anyway, it took several more weeks after that because his lawyer had gotten involved and was claiming he was, the board was violating his due process rights. In this case, they just cauterized it. They just they fired her immediately. And I think it was on the strength of what she said about how, if she'd had a kid, she would have behaved differently. Or had a kid at Rob, she would have behaved differently. That was just more than I think any school district.
And it didn't help that, I think I do give some credit to Brett Cross and the families that were out there. I mean, they were camped out there. I believe it was 245 or 247 hours, day, night, camped out there at the administration building. It was really stressing the district, right? I mean, when I was out there, they actually had, and I didn't include it in my column because word counts, but at one point we're out there, the staff members were escorted in. I mean, there's this long line of people that came and they were being escorted by DPS troopers just to get in the building to get to work. And then the parents were saying, they would shout at them like, oh, it's not you we have a problem with, you're okay, stuff like that. But it was chaotic. It was stressing them. They didn't, I feel like they didn't know what they were going to do next. They were kind of appealing above just to see what we could do at a state level as well. But any move they would make, would look bad, right? And it's like they had to give in.
Carrie, does this decision to suspend the police department, is this kind of an acknowledgement that the system is broken? If we take into account the hiring of this former trooper, the fact, the hiring of their former police chief who had a problematic history in Laredo, which, Brian Chasnoff wrote about for our paper. Is just maybe them finally acknowledging there's some problems with the way we've been going about things?
Of course.
Yes.
Yes. It's like everything they've done, everything that's happened since the shooting. It's been like, how can we make this worse?
Yes.
How can we make it worse for the parents, the families? How can we make ourselves look worse? And something that should have been done more than 5 months ago. But you do have to give Mr. Cross and those families. I mean, that was an act of nonviolent direct action. That was an act of civil disobedience, which won. And one of the interesting things is seeing these families emerging as a political force, which may go beyond 2022. But Uvalde created that. But I also agree with Greg. I don't know if we don't have the video, if Ms. Elizondo is still, if she's fired, but because there's something that you couldn't, and you could just following Twitter and all the parents responding to this. Kimberly Rubio, who to me is really emerging as, which I thought she would when she first appeared before Congress. She's really emerging as, I think, the voice and face of these parents. But it's insane. It really is.
Yeah.
I also think, I mean, it's worth pointing out also that, this is Monday morning. So Monday night, later today, the Uvalde School Board is going to be talking about, the timeline for Hal Harrell, the superintendent's retirement. I don't think this is, there's no coincidence here.
No,
I think I think it could be that the board is setting up his departure to do it as gracefully as is possible under the circumstance. I do think, though, that, just in my own opinion, it's got to happen. Like, this is what this is building up to. I mean, there have been so many mistakes on the school district's part in how they've handled it up to this point that, you can't, if they're going to reestablish, trust with the community, something like this has to happen. We saw something similar with Paula Gold-Williams at CPS Energy after, the Winter Storm Uri and all the fallout from that. This is, it's similar. And you're only going to get a kind of a reset with his departure, I think.
Yeah. What's interesting, I've actually heard from some teachers there and seen also I heard directly from a teacher last night, and this teacher said, just so you know, there's going to be a board meeting Monday. I'm like, yeah, I know. But I appreciate, they reach out and make sure I'm staying on top of it because we cover everything. And I asked her, I said, and she was at Rob that day. She was, she was okay. Her students were okay, but she was there. And she's kept in contact with me since it happened. And I said, so where do you fall? Because there's two factions here. One is pro Hal, one is against. And there's not a clear consensus among the community there. And trust is a huge part of it, right? And I do believe a fresh start will help them, but it's going to hurt because there are so many, even like that teacher she's very against Hal leaving. Right. And I think that there is a lot of anxiety as far as who is going to come in next. And their superintendents before Hal were not the best, is what the consensus is right now. Yeah. And so they're nervous.
Yeah. And I mean, but another way of looking at it is, and this could be a little bit of pie in the sky thinking, but the board could say, all right, this is a real opportunity to reconnect with the community, and here's how we're going to do it. So, it's like I got several news alerts from the Washington Post and the New York Times on the Uvalde School District last year. I mean, this has got to be the highest profile,
it's amazing,
tiny little school district in the country right now. There's a huge amount of focus on Uvalde's school district. And I'm just curious about, when they go out and look for a superintendent, are they going to have school administrators who are really capable and really hungry and really want to come in and turn this district around, and in the process of doing that, kind of making a name for themselves. You could bring in some decent talent that Uvalde might not have attracted otherwise. Oh, yeah. And then you've got, if you want to reconnect with community, a way of doing that is to bring in these families and make them part of the search process.
Right.
Like bring them in for like public interviews with candidates and just get them involved. Get them really invested in this search.
There's an opportunity here. Absolutely.
Yeah. I really hope they don't pick somebody from the inside. Because sometimes that happens. They'll promote somebody and say, well, they've been around, they know it, they know the job, they know the people, they're from here. I feel like if a fresh start should be a fresh start. As much as it will hurt some in the community there, including some of the victims' families. I mean, there's one teacher who she's a teacher in the district, and she lost her child, and she was posting on her Facebook over the weekend pro Hal Harrell, like saying, he's done so much, I love him, he's beloved, he's from here, he went to high school here, he grew up here, and he's from Uvalde, he cares, and we know it. And so, it's going to hurt, but I just feel like if you do somebody from the inside, somebody who worked directly for Hal, you'll get more of the same, right?
Yeah. I wanted to talk a little bit about the controversy that it's been building in recent weeks over the St. Mary's Strip. Now, everybody knows that the St. Mary's Strip has been a kind of a center of nightlife in San Antonio going back to the 1980s. And there's always been some degree of tension between the businesses, the clubs and the bars there, and the nearby residents. And it's gotten, I think, worse in the past year or so. And it hasn't been helped by the fact that we've had all this construction tearing up St. Mary's for the past year and a half. It's been a very slow construction process. A few months ago, city staff hired Pape Dawson engineers to do a study, look at what the problems are and possible solutions. And a recommendation came out of that, which was to have residential permit parking on nearby residential streets from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m., on weekends. This was the idea had been floating around, but the proposal was really kind of dropped in the laps of business people about 2 weeks ago, 2.5 weeks ago. And the original plan was to have a city council vote, or I think it was maybe about 3 weeks ago. And then there was going to be a town hall. And then the following week, there was going to be a city council vote on this thing. And I think business owners were stunned at how fast this was happening and how little time there was for discussion. So September 4th, there was this outdoor parking lot to town hall involving city staff. You had Councilman Mario Bravo, and you had a lot of residents and business owners who were really upset. It looks now like this has been tabled. This idea has been tabled. And I think one thought out there, which Diego Bernal, the former councilman and current state rep, has suggested, is just let's kind of wait a while. This construction process has really disrupted things. Businesses, the owner at Squeezebox, Aaron Prado, has said his business is down about 40%. They were recovering from the pandemic. Now they're dealing with this. So I think there's some thought of now maybe waiting a little bit or seeing if the two sides can work things out between them. But I guess I'll start with you, Greg. I mean, just when you look at this situation, like I said, we all know there's always been, when you got noise, you've got people, drinking late at night. I mean, it's always going to be a problem.
I've always wondered, I've been to a number of Paper Tiger concerts. How the hell do people sleep around here? I mean,
They don't.
God, it's like 1 o'clock in the morning, and you got, So like, I think inherently there's always going to be a tension between an entertainment district like the Strip and the residents, right?
Yeah.
I think what we're seeing is. It's kind of like everything else about the pandemic. It's like things reopen, live venues open up. And it's like, oh my God, it's all coming back to me now. Why I hate the Strip, why I hate living off the Strip. Yeah. It's because, hey, people are back and they're, concerts, we've got concerts again, live acts coming through. People are going out to eat and then go to, their favorite venue on the Strip. So yeah, you have all of this tension you didn't have for about a 2-year period.
Yeah.
And it's all come roaring back now. And so you have neighbors who, it's like who wants to put up with, noise on your street, car, difficulty maneuvering because you've got cars parked on both sides. I mean, so you understand the tension, but I'm not surprised that it's flaring up like this. I mean, just because, the economy is kind of coming back, and this is part of it. It's evidence that, we're kind of over the pandemic in a sense.
Yeah. I don't think there are any easy solutions. I think it's probably going to be kind of a patchwork thing, a combination of ideas, which, and I think the businesses have talked about, having last call a little earlier and maybe pooling their money, hiring some security to kind of create more of a sense of safety in the area. There's been talk about, I think Councilman Rao talked about Tycoon Flats, maybe having some parking spaces available. That's going to be a small help. I mean, really people need a parking garage, but that's not going to happen, I don't think. So anyway, I mean, I think there aren't easy solutions to this.
Yeah, and it's something that's always been, and I do think what Greg's saying of the combination of COVID and construction just exacerbated it. But I was calling, because I mean, it really is thriving now, and it wasn't that long ago. I was trying to put a time frame when it had just died. I mean, like back in the mid 90s, early 2000s, it was going great. Then there came a period when it was just dead, and I can't remember the reason why.
There was a I think there were a few like violent incidents there. There was a high profile shooting a man I think in his late 20s who was there with his wife, and he was murdered, leaving I think a restaurant there. And this was like the middle of 1990. I mean, the Strip continued to do well for a while, but there were a few other incidents. And I think the memory that we have of it is that there was this horrible shooting and people got scared and they immediately stopped. I think it was more gradual than that. Mm-hmm. But I think in the last 10 years, we've seen some new business owners come in, and it's kind of come back.
It's like we tend to talk about the Pearl as this like meteor strike, and it just affects everything around it, and it gets exaggerated sometimes. In this case, I do think, a lot of the kind of re-energized Strip owes something to the Pearl.
That's a great point.
It's really taken hold over the last 15 years. I think that has a lot to do with it too. And it's kind of, I'm not sure how far it is from the Strip. It's not very far at all. Far. Yeah, like a few blocks. Yeah. But you can't see it from the Strip necessarily, but it's definitely making itself felt. I mean, property values are up. There's a lot more people moving through the area, who non-residents, than there had been before. And I think a lot of that's just attributable to the Pearl.
Yeah. I think it's smart to wait. The businesses are really going through a lot with that construction. Mm-hmm. I don't go to I know it's no surprise, but I don't go to the concerts at the Paper Tiger. I just don't. I haven't been to a single one. Maybe I need to change that. You should. So I have not personally experienced it at night. Mm-hmm. But my husband and I went out there to Tycoon Flats to have lunch one day recently, and we had trouble just navigating the construction and finding a parking spot. This was like a Saturday at like 1:00 in the afternoon, and it just made me think, like, how bad is it at night, right? I did hear over the weekend as well that Luther's closed, which is huge, and people were just like, "Are you sure?" And so then it was confirmed, yes, they closed. So I mean, the businesses are really being affected by this. Mm-hmm. And I do think the best thing is to wait and see, at least let this construction, I believe the construction is still going to go another year. Yeah, which is really something. It's a mess.
It has been hard to get Burger Boy at night for a year.
I was just crazy. I was just thinking about Burger Boy.
That's unacceptable.
It's an outrage.
It really is. Yeah.
Whataburger will send you a gift card.
I expect to see picketing later this week about that. So anyway, this is going to be. I think that if there's a positive that's come out of all the anger about the way this thing was kind of this proposal seemed to be kind of being fast tracked for city council confirmation. I think the one positive is that the Tobin Hill residents and the businesses, I think there is some kind of renewed commitment on the side, on both sides, to maybe let's just work together and let's cut the city out of this, because their city is not helping at all with the situation. So we'll see what happens with that. Wanted to, before we wrap things up, talk about the governor's race. Nancy, you had a column over the weekend, a really interesting column about Beto O'Rourke and what's happening with him, and the response he's getting at colleges. And I know Jeremy Wallace was here a couple of weeks ago when Beto was at the office for the editorial board meeting, and I think Beto had just been to UTSA that day and said, and he was saying like Jeremy felt that he had been like at a rock concert. Yes. I mean, it was like his ears were ringing, and it was probably the biggest crowd that he had seen, and he's been covering him for years. So, I mean, what do you think is going on there?
That is why I started paying attention, although I had seen it on all the social media. It was, in my threads everywhere. And I was seeing all these posts, but then I really hadn't paid as close of attention to really look at the size of the crowds. When Jeremy came in here that day for the editorial board, Beto was running a little bit late, and he said, I don't know how late he's going to be, but the lines are long, and he is posing for those photos with the students. And so to hear his, just the excitement Jeremy had about it, just how big the crowd was, I was intrigued. So I started looking at, more closely at his Facebook, his YouTube, his Twitter, and wow, there is no other candidate in Texas, and I would dare, even nationally, who is doing that kind of effort to get the young vote out. Generation Z especially. What the polls say is there is a chance, that Gen Z can actually make a difference. I talked to Mark Jones, and he says, it's possible they could change it. And so Beto he's betting on these young people. I have to say personally, and, having been a teacher and having been, I was just at UTSA for a master's degree program a few years back. It's promising. It's refreshing to see this. I'm excited that young people care, that they give a damn, They're there. You see people of all backgrounds, and they're not just, I hate to say it, but they're just not blue-haired people. They care about the issues. They're excited. They have their signs. They're chanting his name. I just feel like they're really energized. And so just the fact that they want to be civically engaged is so exciting to me.
That's true. And Carrie, this is really the X factor for him, right? Because all the polls have had him, 5 points behind, 7 points behind. He hasn't really been able to get closer than that.
Yeah.
But I think on his side, there's that thought that we don't know. We really don't know what the turnout is going to be, because there is a certain energy that we're seeing among young voters that is not common.
We don't know what we don't know.
Yeah.
And to Nancy's point, there's no other candidate who's doing this. And I'm trying to think of there's two candidates who had this kind of effect on young people. Surprisingly, Bernie Sanders,
Mm-hmm. Sure.
And then Obama.
Mm-hmm.
And Obama got them to vote, Sanders not so much. And it does feel more like an Obama kind of thing because of the great unknowns of Uvalde and Dobbs. And I don't know if you saw Scott Braddock of the Quorum Report had something yesterday about internal polls for Abbott showing that he's tanking.
Yeah,
the
tweet. Yeah, it wasn't clear if he was talking about internal polling for Beto or for Greg Abbott. But yeah, it said that he's tanking in the suburbs, and to me, that's plausible. It's like there's it's a tweet, and we don't know. There's a lot we don't know, and there was, it was just kind of he dashed off, and who knows what he actually saw, but it's plausible. You can understand that Abbott, particularly after the overturning of Roe versus Wade and with this Texas trigger law kicking in, basically effectively banning abortion, you could see where he might not be doing that well with suburban women. So it's totally, I wouldn't be shocked,
Yeah. Before we do finish off, I wanted to take a question. We've been inviting listeners to submit questions for us at expressnews.com/Ask Puro. And we got a recent question, which is, I guess, related to the recent story involving the conflict between Councilman Mario Bravo and fellow council member Ana Sandoval. He was unhappy with her decision to abstain on a vote regarding the surplus that CPS Energy had, and so he confronted her before the council meeting and brought up that they had been in a relationship a few years back, and so he said to her that this is why they weren't together anymore. This is why he didn't want to have a baby with her, and so on. And it's Mayor Ron Nirenberg ended up temporarily removing him from the council committees that he's on. So that's the backstory. And the question we got was, why isn't Councilwoman Sandoval facing any consequences for having an interoffice relationship? And the short answer is that she hasn't had one. When she got elected to city council in 2017, she was in a relationship with Mario Bravo. At the time, he was an environmental activist. He worked to help get her elected at that time. By the time he decided to run for city council in 2021, that relationship was over. So, it's an unusual situation. I'm sure it's been an awkward situation for both of them since he was elected to the city council about a year and a half ago. But neither of them has been in a relationship with a fellow council member or anything like that. So I appreciate the question, and thanks, and submit any other questions you have for us. Hope everyone's doing well. Thanks for listening, and we'll be back next week. Take care.